Hey everyone, welcome back to the Gray Matter Health Podcast, where we talk nutrition, fitness, recovery, and the mindset you need to sustain it all. This is an exciting day for me because I think it is time to wrap up season 1 of the podcast. I've now put out 10 episodes, and I know it's taken quite some time to do that, so thank you for sticking around and listening. But I feel like it has kind of completed the initial narrative arc I wanted for this podcast, introducing who I am, where I come from, why I care so much about health and wellness topics, and my broader overall philosophy based on my lived experience on exercise, on food and nutrition, and on stress and recovery. Now, I think I've given a good scope of where I stand on all of that in season 1. So, moving forward in season 2, this next group of episodes, I would really like to focus more on drilling down into details. I really want to get more down into the nitty-gritty of how to apply the broader lessons and principles we covered this season. So that's what's coming up looking forward. But for today, I really wanted to focus on a little bonus episode where I want to share the top 10 things I wish I knew before I even started this fitness journey. If you've been following along, you know that I haven't always been someone who has been mindful of my health, especially not my physical health. I started out as just another burnt out office worker trying to hustle during the day and not taking care of myself, and really just eating and drinking too much, not moving enough, and following that downward spiral. And I've tried to pick myself up from that a number of times, starting off when I was in high school and college, even. But it took me a really long time and a lot of trial and error to get to the point where I am now, where taking care of myself and being healthy is just a part of my normal routine. So I want to give a little bit of, I guess, advice on what I would tell my younger self if I could go back and do it all over again. So, with that said, I have some notes, but as always, I'm just going to ad lib it and talk about whatever comes to mind on each of these points. So, top 10 things I wish I knew before starting my fitness journey. Number 1 is the value of coaching. Coaching is so invaluable. I know what it's like to be a beginner and feel a little bit of hesitation towards reaching out to someone to help you, especially if it is a formalized thing where you need to pay that person and you feel like, oh, maybe I'm not really ready for this, or I'm not really ready to make that investment in myself. There's always the tendency to want to start out on your own, build a foundation until you somehow get to the place where you then deserve coaching or can benefit from it. But I'm here to tell you that none of that is true. As a coach, I love working with beginners, and I think you can get so much farther if you just bring someone in early on when you have that initial thought that you want to commit to something and invest in yourself. Personally, I used to go to the gym on my own and just follow online programs, following YouTube videos and other sources of instruction. And I did that for a long time before I finally jumped into group lessons where I had a person there, but they were paying attention to the entire class, and I didn't get a lot of individual assistance. But then from there, it was only until later on when I felt more comfortable with myself that I then reached out to personal trainers to have one on one sessions. And I want to tell you that looking back, I now believe that if you can find a good coach, good in terms of experience in what they do, as well as someone who you feel like you can individually vibe with and trust, a 1 hour session alone with that quality coach is worth more than 100 hours of training on your own and trying to figure that out. Let's say that you are learning to lift weights for the first time. As a beginner, you have all these resources at your fingertips, but you don't necessarily have the body awareness to be able to translate all of that advice into action. You can listen to thousands of influencers online and try to repeat what they're saying, try to video yourself, and then readjust based on what you're seeing. But if you can bring in a coach who has an eye for detail and an eye for that specific type of training and the experience to back it up, they can not only instruct you a lot more effectively, but they know from the experience of coaching how to communicate the right cues to get you to adjust your body in the right way. I think the same thing goes for nutrition. Nutrition is something that seems really simple on the surface. You can find all these different plans online, all these different ways of instruction when it comes to cooking and measuring and counting calories. And you can download any one of these millions of plans and try to follow it to the T. But as someone who is not well versed in nutrition as a science, you don't know when you're first starting out which one of those plans is effective and why it's effective for you. You might see some progress following a very strict nutrition plan, but it doesn't incorporate the foods you typically like to eat, or it doesn't necessarily work with your lifestyle long term. A coach takes in a bunch of information, not just the science of calories and nutrients, but the science of you and the psychology of you as a person and the lifestyle you desire. They can very easily hone down a nutrition plan that is individualized to what you need and what's going to be most effective for you. So I definitely wish that I had just reached out to more experts earlier on, that I wasn't ashamed or nervous or embarrassed to do that, but I was just able to get some time with people who knew what they were talking about because honestly, in this world, knowledge is power. And when you can get good knowledge and someone who's empathetic to your situation, that is priceless. Number two is you need a plan and you need to follow that plan. This seems simple on the surface, but I've seen so many times people who've been in the gym even for years still believing that they can adjust and make things up as they go and they'll be fine. If they don't feel like doing an exercise one day, they won't do it. Or if they feel like doing more of a certain exercise, they're just going to modify their plan week by week to incorporate that more. I do remember being a beginner and just feeling like, oh, I can step into the gym and just look around and do a few machines that I feel like doing that day and then going home. But honestly, you are wasting a lot of your effort by doing this and changing things up too frequently. Training plans are built the way they are for a reason. Your body likes a certain interval, a certain intensity, and certain frequency of repetition in order to progress and get better at certain skills. So, if you are not building things in intentionally and going into your training sessions with a plan of what you want to do and knowing why you're doing that workout that day, then you are just giving yourself into the randomness of daily choice. And you're not going to make long term progress that way. I understand the want for variety, the need to not get burned out on doing the same thing day after day. But there's still some value to something called periodization, which is having a certain focus for maybe a few months at a time, somewhere between 6 to 12 weeks where you are dedicated to that focus before you then switch things up. Your body needs that consistency and your body needs that planned progression of effort in order to improve. But with that said, number three is that your plan needs some flexibility built in. We all live unpredictable lives. Things come up, we get injured, we get sick, a friend asks us to go out to eat and we don't want to miss that occasion. There needs to be certain ways for you to still adapt to those situations, even though you're not following your plan strictly point by point. But when I say flexibility, this is where a lot of people get caught up. You definitely want, if you are serious about making progress, to be closer to that rigidity side of the spectrum because adherence to a plan is super important. But that plan also has to be realistic and it has to be adaptable. Because if you mess up on a plan that you feel like you need to be perfect on, it's kind of like a black or white scenario where you feel like I might as well just give up now because I just failed on this little minor detail. You don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, and you want to give yourself a little bit of a margin of error to play with there. So, to break this down, I'll talk about nutrition since I talked about training in the last one. With nutrition, what I often say to people is they need to be consistent about 80% of the time. It's kind of the 80-20 rule, where if you are chasing a specific goal, especially gaining muscle or losing fat, if you stick to a specific nutrition plan, doesn't need to be a strict meal plan, could be a macros plan, could just be like a meal frequency of how often to eat and what to have approximately on your plate. Whatever it is, if you have a nutrition plan, if you only stick to that plan 50% of the time, you're kind of putting in effort half of the time that is going to waste with what you're doing the other half of the time. A very clear example that is common is people being rigidly adherent to nutrition plans during the week, eating exactly what it is on their meal plan, Monday through Friday, and then going completely haywire over the weekend. So it does need to be a little more consistent than that, but not by much. I find that a lot of people who I coach on nutrition do very well even on a strict weight loss goal when they allow themselves to have 1 or 2 restaurant meals a week and have the rest prepared at home where there's a little bit more control. Number 4 is that you need to get uncomfortable to make progress. So, getting comfortable with discomfort is a very important part of your journey because nothing's going to change if you stay in your comfort zone. A lot of people underestimate just how hard they have to push themselves in the gym and with their nutrition in order to make meaningful changes. It's easy to underestimate this at first because when you are a complete beginner, anything you do is going to create change. That may only last for the first few months or the first cycle, whereas eventually you are going to have to push yourself to the point of pain or discomfort in order to then push yourself even further. An example that recently came up for me is that one of my friends expressed that he wanted to start running. Now, if you've ever started a running plan from a period of being sedentary or not doing much cardiovascular exercise, you know that it is not gonna feel good at first. Your body's not used to breathing that hard. It's not used to working that hard to get oxygen to all your muscles as you are running. Your legs aren't used to the impact on the pavement. You might not be going as fast as you expected, and you get tired really easily because you're deconditioned. If you're not used to that feeling, it doesn't feel great. But you have to push through those and continue to push through those in order to make progress. But the good news is, if you practice putting yourself in situations where you are uncomfortable, you will build resilience to it. Physically, it'll feel the same, but mentally, once you get over that hump of just accepting that, hey, this is going to hurt a little bit, but I'm ready for it, then it becomes much easier to keep putting yourself in those positions. And then that translates far beyond just trying to run. It will help you be able to jump into doing difficult things in general, which is just a reality of life. Number 5 is the flip side of this, which is that you also need to recover to make progress. Taken to the extreme, people will push themselves into discomfort. They'll train really hard, but then they won't do the other side of the equation, which is eating sufficiently to recover, sleeping sufficiently to recover, having situations where they can basically let go and relieve some of the mental stress and pressure that's on them. Everyone goes through this point where they keep adding volume, they keep adding intensity until their body is constantly sore, they're fatigued all the time, and they kind of feel like training isn't fun anymore. That is a clear sign that you do not necessarily need to taper back on your exercise, but you do need to focus on whether you have the capability to recover from what you're doing in the gym. As people get older, this becomes even more important. When we're not in our 20s anymore, our bodies just simply can't take so much load. We might have to think of ways to scale back on volume and intensity, or ways to beef up our recovery routine, whether that is improving the nutrients in the food we eat or making our bedroom more relaxed for better quality sleep. Those things are equally important because you only get better if you can recover from your training. Number 6, weight gain is not a personal failure, and it is not a lack of willpower. A lot of us have been socialized to believe that if we put on some weight, if we're getting fat, then something is wrong with us. We're not doing enough and we're slipping up. We're very quick to moralize and demonize overeating and emotional eating and feel bad about ourselves when we do eat too much and we don't move enough to burn those excess calories. It sucks because it's kind of a secret shame that you hold within yourself, and it doesn't feel socially safe to talk about it all the time with just anyone. But the reality of this is that almost all of us have been through this experience of putting on some weight and feeling a lot of shame for it. I want to encourage you to depersonalize that experience in terms of not blaming yourself for it. Emotional eating doesn't just happen for no reason. It doesn't happen just because we become lazy overnight, or we become not as committed to our goals, or we make mistakes out of the blue. It happens when the pressures on us, the stressors on us, overweigh our ability to recover from them. Weight gain is a survival mechanism. We have to remember that even though the stressors in the modern world are very different from how they were back when we were cavemen, our bodies are not that different. Whenever we interpret a threat in our environment, whether it be a work deadline or an argument with a friend, we still have the same fight or flight response. Our body tries to mobilize resources and either fight or get the hell out of there, even if it's not a physical threat. But what that does in our food environment is it attracts us to these really high calorie dense, sugar dense snacks where we can get a lot of energy in a very little amount of time just to hoard and prepare for when we need to utilize that. Unfortunately, we are physically seated in an office eating chocolate covered pretzels and not doing much. Even though I fully acknowledge that there's an element of personal responsibility to making those choices, it is much more productive to approach that choice with curiosity of what in our environment and in our lives has caused us to feel this amount of stress or pressure that we're relieving through eating. Solving the root cause of it is going to be a lot more effective in the long term than just blaming yourself for messing up and not digging into the reasons behind it. Number 7 is to create systems and find ways to make what you want to do enjoyable and easy to do. I am a nutritionist, but I used to hate cooking. I especially used to hate meal prepping because it just took up so much time. I did not enjoy being in the kitchen, and I had no motivation to do that on the weekend when I finally got to relax. It just felt like a chore to me. But what ended up really changing the game for me in that regard is learning to couple my cooking time with an enjoyable activity. Maybe it was watching a trashy reality show that I didn't want to spend time on otherwise, or listening to a podcast, or listening to a new album from an artist that I like. Trying to find ways to entertain myself made cooking a lot easier and a lot more entertaining for me. So eventually I was able to get over that hump of doing meal prep every week because it became something to look forward to rather than something that I dreaded. The same thing can be done with workouts. I always give myself a little bit of an incentive that aligns with my fitness goals. When I go to the gym, that is the time where I allow myself to have a little bit of a sweet treat because I know that having glucose in my bloodstream and just having a little bit of extra carb is actually going to empower me to work a little bit harder in the gym. So I choose to give myself a little bit of a mental and physical boost by giving myself a little piece of candy, a little bit of a preemptive reward for my workout. That's what helped me get into the mode initially of doing exercise early in the morning. Number 8 is that this all starts with self respect. You need to value your body in order to nourish it. And you need to respect yourself in order to invest in these goals that benefit yourself. I think coming into an exercise and fitness program or a nutrition program with low self esteem is gonna more often than not be a recipe for failure. A lot of us come into this initially feeling like, oh, I need to change myself first in order to build that confidence. But if you are trying to change yourself from a position of self hatred, from a position of punishment, it is not going to last. I know this probably takes the longest out of all the tips I've shared so far, but it is very crucially important that you're also working towards getting to a position where you are taking care of yourself because you genuinely love yourself, not because of things that you want to take away or modify or remove about yourself. But coming from a place where you love yourself, you're invested in yourself, you have that self respect, it is going to make everything more rewarding and more sustainable. Number 9 is to tell someone about your goals or speak them out loud. I know that is a very vulnerable position. It's hard to share things we're working on that we might have a very likely possibility of failing on. And it also seems maybe that people aren't so interested in our personal goals. But if you sincerely want to become stronger, become leaner, perform in an activity, eat more nutritiously, those things are a lot more easily accomplished when you have at least a little bit of accountability. So, if you can tell a loved one what you're working on, it just brings everything into reality. It makes it less of a theoretical hope and wish that you're just keeping in private and brings that into the real world because now someone else knows about it. So, whatever you do, whatever you're working on, always try to talk about it to at least one other person to make it more concrete. And lastly, number 10 is that this is a non-linear journey and it's important to keep giving yourself grace. Everyone online will make it seem like fitness is a point A to point B journey, that you just put in some effort, put in some time, and then you're able to get from where you started to where you ended, and then you'll stay there. But that is almost never the case. You're gonna go back and forth, you're gonna have ups and downs, you'll make some progress, you'll lose that progress. You will maybe end up at a point where you are less fit than you ever were, or at least it feels that way, and then you have to crawl your way back up. But you have to have persistence because things are always going to happen. There are going to be things that hold you back, that disrupt your progress. It is rarely, if ever, a linear journey where you are constantly making progress forward. So just have patience, have grace in yourself, and enjoy the steps as much as possible without putting pressure to constantly be improving in every stage of life. And that about wraps it up. So, as a review, number 1, coaching is invaluable. 2, you need a plan. 3, your plan needs some flexibility built in, but not too much. 4, you need to get uncomfortable to progress. 5, you also need to recover to progress. 6, weight gain isn't a failure of will and it isn't a personal failure. 7, create systems to make the habits you want to build easy and enjoyable. 8, learn to value yourself. 9, tell someone about your goals. And 10, have grace for yourself because it is a non-linear journey. So I hope that helped at least in one small way, and stay tuned for season 2. Thanks so much for listening.